Hello, everybody. Well, we have heard your feedback, and Angela and I are back. We typically do these once a quarter, just check in. What are the trends? What do we want to talk about? But we have a lot of fun doing it, and we've got a lot of positive feedback on it. So we're going to do it more often now. So, hello, Angela.
Yay. Hello, Will.
Yeah. What before we jump into what we're going to be talking about and sort of the trends, the big ideas, what are you reading?
So admittedly, what I'm reading right now is not at all industry or work related, but it's fun.
Yeah,
I am
we
reading a
need fun.
book called None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, who's one of my favorite authors. It's a psychological thriller.
Mhm.
It is there's a new word that has come up in the thriller genre called unputdownable. It is not an actual word. I don't think you'd be able to find it in Webster's dictionary. But I think this is one of those books that definitely falls into that category because I literally wake up every day and look forward to the end of the day when I can pick it back up and read it because
Nice.
it's a crazy story.
Yeah.
The headline is that it's about two women who meet at a bar on their birthdays. They shared the same birthday,
Mhm.
same age. They were born in the same hospital. One is a podcaster, um, very apropos in this conversation. And the other is this woman who's just lived what can only be described as a very sort of vanilla existence. You know, she's just kind of stuck in a rut life wise. And she decides to propose that this podcaster do a series about her and her life because she's on the verge of some significant change. And
Mhm.
it turns out that her backstory is a lot darker than she initially indicated in the bar and in their first meetings. And then at one point, she just disappears. And
Hmm.
all of these crazy things happen as a result of that disappearance. So I've gotten almost to that point in the book. And I will probably find a way to finish it this weekend because I
Yeah.
just am so stuck on this story. What about
Yeah.
you?
That does sound like one that'd be tough to put down. Pretty fast paced. And I'm starting the Expanse series, so I'm on Leviathan Wakes right now. A little over halfway done. We took a vacation recently, and I finished up the last of the Thursday Murder Club books, and it's like, okay, I need something new to jump into, and so I jumped into a massive book that's taking me a
I love
very
it.
long time.
How massive are we talking?
uh, what is the page count? I will look it up. Very big.
Hundreds, many.
It's the first in a decent series. So
Yeah,
yeah, very good. I like
I love
stories
it.
that you've got multiple perspectives, the threads all tie together, and it's still just this mystery of no one has any clue what's going on. Uh, it's a lot of fun so far. So, well, what is the first thing that has really piqued your interest recently?
So this is actually very recent. I was going through my inbox after taking some time off recently, and it's an article from Knuckleball Consulting, but it really it speaks to a broader, not necessarily a trend, but an undercurrent that I've been seeing and hearing in the industry, and that is around parents questioning the value of independent schools specifically. I know that there's been a lot of talk about how this is playing out in higher ed. Parents and students alike are kind of like, is this something that I still need to do? I can still get a job without going to college, and I don't know if I want to take on the debt. And this is a little bit of a different flavor. But definitely something that I think is worth looking into. So, in this article specifically, it talks about getting into the minds of parents who are not actively considering your school or even a school like yours. And one of the barriers that's covered is tuition, which we've talked about on this podcast before. I know there's
Mhm.
been a lot of conversation around that in the independent school space about how tuition just continues to go up and up and up. We've been talking about it for 20, 30 years now. There
Yep.
doesn't seem to be an end to that trend. And then culture, specifically in the article, there's a statement that culture can be inhospitable to normal people, which is a real
That,
is a very real thing. It's a very
yeah.
real thing. And something I've flagged in the past, with schools as they think about how they present themselves on social media and other websites and in other ways. And so the first challenge, tuition, is something that could to some degree be dispelled just with data, comparative data, looking at other similar schools, looking at trend data and how tuitions have increased over time in independent schools. In a lot of cases, it just sort of is what it is. But the second part, the cultural piece, can be a lot tougher. And so the article talks about everything from the varsity blues scandal to this ongoing shift that we're seeing where prestigious higher ed institutions are doing away with legacy admissions. That's something that I feel like there's a new headline I see about that every couple of weeks. And then there's the student loan crisis, which affects different families to different degrees. And then we're going to talk about FAFSA later. And so there's this increasing question of, seeing independent schools more as places where people who are really well off send pretty standard, the word untalented children, which I feel is a pretty significant. I wouldn't quite go there, but
Yeah.
they send their children, their untalented children, to get kind of, fluffed up for this goal that may not even necessarily be real anymore. And so where in the past there was this perception that independent schools recruited very top high level students from parochial schools, from public schools, now what was seen as that common value proposition for parents who had really high achieving students, and that was their sort of ticket to a blue chip college, that's something that's being undermined. And so the question that I take away from that is, if an independent school is not that golden ticket, Willy Wonka style, to a prestigious university, what is it for? And I think the argument could be made that there are many independent schools that are process schools and not product schools. They don't necessarily position themselves as being an avenue for that specific outcome. But even with that in mind, I think there's an increasing urgency for independent schools to be able to answer that value proposition question, because whether or not you are a product school, they're all charging the same amounts of money, right? And so you're still charging an amount that is consistent with peer institutions in your local area that might have, that more high-end college list. And so the argument that's made in this particular article is that the solution for this is to have visible, authentic excellence. And excellence looks different in different environments. Sometimes that is the college list. They're always going to be the bumper sticker parents that I've talked about in the past. But for other types of independent schools, that can look a lot of different ways. And what I loved about this article is that it unpacks what that can look like for you. But the point is that you have to actively engage with your local community. So if you exist in a bubble that is disconnected from the community around you, no amount of marketing can fix that. No amount of marketing can really address that. You really do have to be actively engaged in that community and create those opportunities for, I think it was Jill Goodman who referred to public displays of learning, and so some of the examples in the piece were Christ Episcopal School in Covington, Louisiana. They have a really well-known theater program. Their theater performances are so, well-known and renowned that they go on for, several days, week-long runs, so that they can accommodate really large audiences beyond the people who are immediately connected to the school community. And they also have a theater camp that sells out really quickly, not just for their own students, but for families who have been exposed to these incredible performances. That's an incentive for them to try to engage with the theater camp. And that opens up opportunities for them to experience their facilities and their faculty and to get a little bit of a taste of what it's like to be part of that community. And that's something that type of experiential connection is something that's really hard to replicate in any sort of campaign. It's a very different type of marketing, but it's still marketing. Um, and then the other example that was given was from a K to 8 school in South Bend, Indiana, so not far from you,
Yep,
Stanley
just down the
Clark
road.
School, which is a K to 8. And they have a blog that's really, high subscribership, very well read, and it's written by students and faculty. So they're showcasing different parts of the community, and they focus on very timely, high interest topics for current and prospective parents. And so that allows them to collect subscribers who are not members of the immediate community, but it shows the expertise that people can experience when they are engaged with that community. And I think that's an important call out too, because a lot of schools have experimented with blogging for different ways as a way to showcase what's happening on campus. But you can do that with social media. If you are using a blog for thought leadership, though, that's a very different approach. And that's an approach that could arguably be a bit more effective. It's not just about here's what's happening today or something programmatic, but it's an opportunity for different members of your community to really demonstrate a form of thought leadership and expertise that can be hard to convey in other ways. And so I thought that was a really good example of how something like a specific tactic, like blogging could be really so that schools could think about it differently, from the way that I've seen it in the past. Because we've even seen in our parent survey, it's not necessarily a big enrollment driver, but I think part of that is because they're not always used effectively. It's more of a look at me, look at us, see what happened on campus today. But if you use it for thought leadership, that's a very different spin on that tactic.
Yeah. I think part of the thing that jumped out to me here is this idea that the whole purpose of the independent school is to say my student went to this college, or if you're a K8 even, or a K6 or a K4, they went on to this high school. Uh, and I would really push back on that in general. If that's what you think the purpose of the school is, you're saying that it's not about the experiences. It's not about the community. It's not about how much they learn, right? I think that's supposed to be what school's about, right? It's about what's that next step look like. And I've found, at least from looking at lots and lots of high school profiles when I was sitting on a campus, it's always interesting to me the private independent schools who would tout our students go to this list of schools that everyone in the nation has heard about. But then you look at where they actually go, and yeah, a handful of students do go there, but most go to the public flagship state schools. It's like, well, okay, so your students are going to the same place as the ones going to the public high school that's free. So what else is the differentiator? Yes, you can tout, oh, they go to these schools. Okay, but so could anyone from anywhere. And most of your students don't. So what is it? Is it the experiences? Is it the opportunities? Is it smaller class sizes? Those are the things that to me are much bigger differentiators. Instead of having a class of 20 where you get to work one-on-one with the teacher 2 times a day, hey, we have a class of 10 and you're going to get a lot of one-on-one time. They're really going to help your student focus on the things that get them excited to learn. That's a differentiator much more. And this is me putting on my parent hat. Much more of a differentiator for me than it would be to say, you should come to our school because some of our students go on to Ivy League schools. Okay, great. But they can do that from anywhere.
I think that what else question is a very important question because even if you are a school that has a steady pipeline of students who attend prestigious universities, it's still important to be able to talk about something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say it's important to understand what your true differentiators are. And that could vary very widely depending on your market. So, small class sizes, for example. Okay, but if you're talking to families who are only evaluating independent schools, that's not a differentiator. Every
Yeah.
independent school has small class sizes. And depending on where you are, your local public schools could still have small
Mhm.
class sizes. I think that there's this common misperception that every public school has 40 kids in a classroom with one teacher, and there's no differentiation. There's no,
Mhm.
the children are not known and they don't have relationships with their teachers. But I think that's an assumption.
Yeah.
And you have to really challenge your assumptions and do the work of understanding what your competition really looks like so you can also understand what your differentiators actually are. Same with
Mhm.
facilities. Independent schools are well known for using fundraising to continuously improve their campuses. I have seen some schools that have buildings and facilities that would rival what you would see on a college campus. But I have also seen some very well funded public school districts who are able to achieve the
Mhm.
same thing.
Yeah.
There are a lot of districts where, depending on where they are one bond proposal away from having a state of the art middle school or state of the art high school or state of the art elementary school that, you look at the renderings and it's really hard to tell the difference. And so, one of the things that the article talks about earlier is getting feedback, and how a lot of consultants recommend going really wide and broad with market feedback. And I think that there is a role to be played for that. But it's also really important to talk to people who are part of your current community and people who explored becoming part of your community and chose something else, because that can help you to start to get to the heart of what it really is that makes your school different, instead of just assuming and
Mhm.
focusing on things without actually getting feedback from the market.
Yeah. When it's interesting that you're hitting on, we're seeing the same price issues and cost issues that we've seen in higher ed for years. And at the same time, everyone wants to blame the school, blame the college. The reason it's gone up is because basically the market wants it to go up, right? And I say that because they want the new facilities. They want
Right.
smaller class sizes with more qualified teachers. That costs money. They
Yeah.
want more athletics. They want the big new football stadium. They want, these things all cost money. When
Hmm.
you have all the technology that students expect now, that costs money. Faster internet access, that costs money. All these things just keep adding up. And if you tried to pare it down and make it less expensive, then who's enrolling?
Right.
Right? You want to complain about the cost, but you don't want to not have the things that the cost pays for.
Hmm.
It's a balancing act there. That
Yeah.
yes, they may be able to trim some here and there, but if you want state of the art everything, unfortunately, there's a price tag there.
And it can be a high one.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
and it is. That's that we see that play out with these tuition costs. And the other piece that I think is really important to understand, and part of what makes this so hard, is that, especially on the K-12 side, is that a lot of the time the 3 to 5% tuition increases that you tend to see, there's a correlation between that and salary increases for
yeah,
faculty and staff, right? And so if you want to continue to recruit highly qualified teachers and provide them
and
with good
retain.
benefits and retain them and provide them with professional development opportunities
Mhm.
and all of the other things that they need to continue to deliver in the classroom and create that experience, their compensation has to be, at least on par with, your public school system, other school
Yeah.
types, and with independent schools too, you end up with a lot of faculty members who aren't necessarily career teachers. They might
Mhm.
be people coming from, the professional world who are so passionate about their industry that they want to teach it. And what that also means is they have a lot of other options.
Mhm.
An engineer who decides that they want to teach a robotics class can always go back to engineering.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to think
They're
about
not
that
doing it for
too.
the money in the first place, but they also have to be able to pay
Absolutely.
the bills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, what else has piqued your interest?
So everyone knows at this point that AI is one of my favorite topics. It continues to be, even though I know the chatter and the buzz has calmed down a little bit, but I still think it's very important.
Well, I hear
I think we
AI
can
solves all the
all.
world's problems, and
Ooh, we are not there yet. Definitely not there yet, especially after the I watched Jennifer Lopez's latest movie on Netflix, Atlas, about AI gone wrong over the weekend. And so do with that what you will. But, from a marketing perspective, from an industry perspective, it's still very much important and in the mix. And so the next thing that I wanted to share, it actually does not come from a school or anyone school related, but it comes from a company called Tendo Communications, which is a B2B marketing firm. They do content marketing work specifically. I've been following them for a while, and this is from one of their recent newsletters. And it talks about 10 AI use cases using a hierarchy based on the level of difficulty to execute. And it was a very different kind of spin that I had seen on conversations around AI. And what I thought was particularly interesting about this, aside from the graphic, which we'll link to, I think is very
yeah.
helpful, but also it ends with content creation, which is interesting because in most conversations about AI, especially as it relates to marketing, that's where people start. That's where people are told to start. And in this article, they actually recommend that you do that last after you've started with much simpler tasks. So you can kind of build your skill set with prompt engineering, but also start with things that don't involve quite as much risk as content creation,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a very appropriate recommendation. And so it starts with brainstorming and ideation being the simplest thing, creating your own chatbots or AI agents and content creation being the most difficult. And I just thought it was such a practical discussion of generative AI use, and it cuts through a lot of the noise and the urgency that is out there about how you have to be, if you're not actively using it, you're behind, and just gives you this practical guide for a slower, more deliberate approach to adoption, which I actually think is the more appropriate way to go,
Yeah.
especially in a school environment.
Yeah. I love that. I love the practical. I love simple. I love that there's a visual and not just wall of text. They did a great
Yes,
job there. So big kudos there. Can I make a bold proclamation here? And
do
maybe
it.
you'll argue with me on this. I, I don't think AI can create content. And I say that because all it's doing is basically summarizing and paraphrasing what everyone's already said and done. It takes the model, it says, here's our topic. What's the most likely next word, phrase, idea? It's not doing anything new. It's just rehashing what's already been done. And it's interesting. When I've played with it before, and I said, okay, so write me a paragraph about this. And I test and I see, how do I break it? How do I do all this? More often than not, I find plagiarism, because
Hmm.
it's pulling in what people have already said and done. So if you're trying to do, oh, well, we can just have it create all of our brochures, we can have it create our taglines, you're going to be saying the same thing as everyone else. It's not going to come up with anything new for you. There's no creativity to it. It's just, how do we make something that summarizes what's already been done?
I don't disagree with that. And I think that is where, and this is called out in this post too, there is a very rigorous amount of editing that is
Mm-hmm.
required when you are using AI for content creation, if
Yeah.
you want to avoid plagiarism, which
Yeah.
you should be actively
I
doing.
hope.
Right. And so I think that's just another reminder for people that it's not a turnkey silver bullet solution. Is it, can it be a shortcut? Yes. Can it save you time? Sure. I am a big believer that AI can rescue you from the blank page,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm still not sold from a content generation standpoint that AI can be a complete substitute for a skilled writer with in-depth knowledge of a specific industry or topic. I have yet to see a substitute for that. Have I used generative AI to help me with outlines, to help me draft things that I then go through and take an axe to?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I would never say that you can set it and forget it with that technology, no matter how sophisticated it gets.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it useful with okay, what else am I forgetting here?
Hmm.
There were like 2 points that it brought up that I completely forgot about. Okay, let me work that in.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
and the rewriting in a
Hmm.
standardized voice is very helpful because if I'm writing something quickly, you've seen my drafts.
Yeah.
It's helpful to have things written a little more coherently sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Or even just, like we use Jasper internally. I think I've mentioned that
mhm,
before. It has a great browser extension that I'll
mhm,
use, and I'll say, help me improve this, or help me say this differently, or simplify this. It's great for things like
yeah,
that. I love using it for things that I have already created and asking it to make it better or make slight tweaks to it. But I completely agree that we're just not in a place where you can say, write this for me
yeah.
and run with it without doing a lot of
A lot
editing.
of people are. So in one way,
I
we
know,
are at
I
that
know.
time, but it's not the high quality stuff.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly, exactly. Uh, well, I think the first thing that is on everyone in higher ed's mind or haunts their dreams or is the reason for their tears, the FAFSA. And
Dum dum dum.
and I'm finally starting to see some coverage of, oh yeah, we should be working on current students too, because current students have to file the
Correct.
FAFSA.
Yes,
And
they
if they're having
do.
trouble and they're not getting the support and all that, what's that going to do to retention? What's that going to do to their likelihood to persist at all? So I'm glad we're finally starting to see some focus there. I hope on campus, and this is where it's always hard because what's going on campus is on campus. Like you don't have that same
Mhm.
window that you do with prospective students. So I hope this has been going on for months, but it's there's just a lot that has to be done, and there's not a lot of staff to do it. So uh, not everyone I know is familiar with sort of the timeline of what's going on. So I thought I'd back up a step here, kind
Love
of bring
that.
everyone in here. If we get back in our Wayback Machine and we go back to the year 2020, you remember 2020? I feel like something happened that year.
I don't
Um,
know. Rings a
yeah,
bell, but
yeah. Well, it was probably because the FAFSA simplification was in the appropriations bill back in 2020. That's what you're thinking of, I'm sure.
yes,
Uh,
that's exactly it.
and and you living where you are, I'm sure appropriation bills come up all the time. So
All the time.
just
All the time.
casual conversation,
Yeah.
all that.
Birthday
So
parties.
yes, kids on the playground, they take turns playing tag. My daddy said this about the appropriations bill. Um,
Exactly.
yep.
Exactly.
Well, so that's where and it was billed as FAFSA simplification. I would say it was much more of a update and overhaul.
Yeah.
It needed an overhaul. I'm not sure how much it simplifies, but does simply make it more easy to maintain in the long run, which is good. It got delayed in 2021, so not long after it was approved for the 2024-25 cycle. So it got a long time to run up to it, a lot of time to work on it. The big thing there, while it may seem simple to say, well, we're just updating a form, right? But it's a form that's connected to a lot of different things that requires a lot of security because you're connecting it to people's tax records and everything else. It's complicated. It was actually, and I found this interesting. It was written in COBOL. Now, COBOL is a programming language that sort of peaked back in the 60s and 70s. It's
Oh,
still used very extensively in the financial services industry. So, like almost every ATM you see runs on COBOL. Um, I'm glad they're switching it out because how many 20 and 30-year olds are learning COBOL? Not a lot.
none, I would guess.
There's a handful, I'm sure,
Yeah,
and
well,
they're
there
in
have
high
to, yeah,
demand.
we do need people to do that,
Yeah.
but wow.
And
Goodness.
COBOL has notoriously hard to update and maintain. So it's being moved over to Amazon Web Services, uh, which is another one. That was an interesting one to me, but
Hmm.
hopefully they have good security handing over everyone's financial records to their servers. Uh, June of 2022. So here we are, year and a half after the appropriations bill passed. The contract was awarded to General Dynamics, which you're probably thinking, wait, they're a defense contractor. Yes, they are, but they have a small division that does basically web forms, essentially, as one does when you're building missiles. And it was not really a new thing. It was basically adding on the simplification to existing work that they'd been doing since 2015. I assume that I didn't find a good reference for this, but I assume that was when they were starting to look at the prior, rather than when we moved to October being the filing date, which is good. Generally now, students can start filing their FAFSA October 1st, but it wasn't ready. So in spite of having years to work on it, not ready October 1st. Okay. This is where me saying, wait, okay, we need this ready October 1st. So if we're building this new form alongside the old one, let's do it right. Let's launch the old form for another year here while we get this one right. That's me looking hindsight. That if you're building something new, I'm a big fan of testing and building as you go. This isn't something you should do that with. Um,
That would
so
make too much sense, though,
I
Will.
know
Like, why
it.
would we do that?
It finally launches December 30th, but completely fails.
Mhm.
All sorts of problems. Late March, colleges finally start getting the ICERs, which is the output of the FAFSA that colleges receive. But there's problems with those. So here we are, end of May. There's still students who don't have financial aid packages. There's still students who are unable to file a FAFSA. Uh, this is an enormous failure. It is extremely stressful for students, for colleges, for parents. I mean, this is, I don't know how we get here without saying, even if we back in November say, okay, there's more problems than we expected. This is enormously complex. Yep, let's launch the old form again. I can't imagine they completely deleted the old form and said, nope, we're just going to toss this in the trash and move on. But my
Well,
goodness.
it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It is
But here we are
possible.
now that
Hmm.
we are 8 months in ish now.
Yeah.
Um, I hope that there have been a lot of comm flows going out to current students, going to prospective students, going to current high school students and their advocates. And I always lump together advocates being parents, school counselors, CBOs. Um, how do we make sure everyone knows what's going on? How are you informed? What to expect? Because you have to have a plan by now for next year. Because the likelihood that something could go wrong next year is extremely high. Uh, this is where I don't know. I don't know that. I think so many people are terrified about this class that we're
Hmm.
not working ahead enough. We're not going out to school counselors saying, okay, if this happens again next year, here's how we're going to handle it. We're going to give out estimated financial aid packages by this date if we can't do full ones. Um, there's a lot that can be done and can be prepped for, and I really, really hope it has been. Some colleges did a good job with the here's your estimated financial aid package, and that's worked very well for them. Others have said, nope, we're going to wait until we get your ICER and everything's clean. And
Hmm.
even then, we got your ICER, but there were problems with it. So the package you received wasn't accurate. And now we have to go back and do it again. If you could have as long as everything comes in correctly from the FAFSA, here's what your package looks like, it gives students a starting point rather than we head into the summer with them not having a clue.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'll get down off my soapbox there. It just it boggles the mind. It's one of those where I'm kind of glad that it's not my problem directly right now, But
Yeah.
I really hope people have the capacity to start working ahead and working with the CBOs, working with the counselors, uh, because they need to know. I mean, there's going to be nuances between colleges. They're generally aware, or in some cases, if they're well resourced, they're very aware of what's going on. But being able to tell students, hey, if you're looking at these three colleges, here's what they're going to do in case there are problems next year. Here's what they've done this year. Make sure they have the tools to serve students, because you cannot reach every student, especially if you don't know who they are yet. So,
Yeah. I mean, honestly, for me, my biggest concern is that for a lot of institutions, they're going to be so focused on firefighting for
mhm.
this class that they just don't even have the brain space
Yeah,
or human capital capacity to start proactively thinking about what's our plan B if things don't work out for next year.
yeah,
And that's very scary for a lot of reasons.
yeah, yeah. Well, on to another topic that I'll probably get a little soapboxy on here. Uh, we are college education right now. It's a buyer's market, right? There are
Yes.
colleges
Yes.
struggling. There's not as many students, and yet we're not seeing that adaptation, that recognition. We're still saying, well, students should still have to jump through these hoops. We should
Hmm.
still be the gatekeepers rather than the guides. Uh, there isn't as much focus on how do we give students what they need and want. It's here's what we offer, and here's why you should come and fit into our what we want to do. If it's just there's a lot of resistance. I don't know where it's stemming from, whether it's lack of time and energy to address it because you're constantly putting out these fires. I don't know if it's
Hmm.
coming from board, from faculty, from leadership. That no, we are a place of excellence, and so students should have to submit three recommendations and their test scores, their blood type, and that'll it's there's just not as much. And I think on top of all that, you talked about questioning the cost on independent school side. Of course, they're questioning the cost on higher ed. The downside here, though, too, um, people are always focused on the cost, but what they really mean is um, they're focused on the price, and what they really mean is the cost. Everyone's focusing on that sticker price,
Mm.
and nobody is paying that at a lot of places. So it's what does it actually cost? What am I actually going to pay? Not what does it look like it's going to. And this is where I always use the example when I talk about this of buying a cheeseburger. That if I am a high school student, every purchase I make is the same. I see the price. I'm going to buy a cheeseburger. It says it's $5. I'm going to get to the register. I'm going to pay $5 plus tax, right? And yet, when I see the price of college, whoa, 40,000 a year. Okay, I'm going to write that one off. I can't afford that. But it's priced so differently because the price is not the
Yeah.
cost. The cost is 15,000, 10,000, 20,000. And yet there's that pricing mismatch. And I know a lot of the reasons. It's because of a lot of aid programs are based on the price, not what
Hmm.
students would actually pay, and there's all sorts of other there's a lot of reasons why it's priced the way it is. I would love to see some of that simplified, and yet I have no
Yes.
power or authority. But one of the other big things is there's a lot of bad reporting because you have people who don't fully understand it. They want the headline, but don't take the time to do
Hmm.
the research on was it ever. I mean, you've probably seen plenty of headlines about, well, it's $100,000 in debt, and you see that term come up all the time. And yes, there are some people who are 100,000 in debt. You usually call them doctor though,
Hmm.
and they're doing okay. So I looked up what was the average, and I for anyone who will never know this or see this, we have a planning doc, and I went through and I cheated a little, and I put the answers to these questions in white text so Angela couldn't see them and know the answers. What do you think the average debt for an undergraduate degree is right now?
$50,000.
50,000 for an undergrad degree. Average debt for an undergrad degree is 29,000.
Oh, wow.
Not much different than a car. And one of those things gains
I thought I
value,
was
and
aiming low, but
you were
okay.
getting
All
no,
right.
but based on the
Yeah,
headlines
the
and based on all the
headlines.
fears and concerns, that would be guessing low. It's also not
Mm-hmm.
realistic. Now, there's another interesting stat here for people under 24. So this is where we're much more likely to get people who are finishing on time, who don't have a
Mm-hmm.
master's, who don't have what's the average debt you think for people under the age of 24?
15,000.
Very close, 14. 14.
Okay. I was like,
Very
let me go
close.
with
Yep.
half of the original
Yep.
number.
So this idea of it's crippling debt will never, you know, well, so I pulled up a little calculator here and looked at repayment schedules. If you do a repayment in 10 years, and I'm one of those people who worked my way through college, I took out no loans, I applied for a lot of scholarships. So
Good for
I
you.
don't know how long you pay back loans, but let's say 10 years. If we're repaying in 10 years, on the high side, if you're that over 24, 29,000 in debt, that's $314 a month payment. For the under 24, that 14,000, that's 151 a month. Those are significant, yes.
Wow.
I wouldn't call them crippling either, though,
No, that's
because
so interesting.
yeah, in a month, I mean, how much does someone spend going out to eat? How much does someone spend on entertainment? How much, like,
Don't ask me.
yeah,
Not on the food part anyway. Oh
yeah,
gosh, I'm terrible with the going out to eat.
and yeah, that this is where is that an amount that you should take seriously? Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's if you're not paying it back on time, those numbers just keep going up and up. Uh, if you're only making minimum
absolutely.
payments, those numbers keep going up. Any debt needs to be taken seriously. But saying that if I'm under 24, that 14,000 number, saying that's crippling to someone,
Mm.
that I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that. Even if you're a teacher and you're making 30,000 a year, that yes, that will make things
It'll put
tight.
a dent. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
but the conversation around the cost of college is one that I find to be very interesting
Mhm.
because I think a lot of the issues that we see are related to this level of understanding.
Mhm.
There's a real reality check that's really necessary, not just in understanding the actual cost of attending a college, but the range of costs that you see and why you see
Mhm.
those ranges, and also looking at value. When you see these headlines about people questioning the value
Yes.
of a college degree, the value of higher education, I actually don't think that's the right phrasing. Because it's so nuanced. It's so
Mhm.
nuanced. And I think that it's also a very one-dimensional perspective on what higher education is for. It's based on the idea that's actually pretty outdated that, yes, in our parents' generation, higher education was that ticket to a job, right? It
Mhm.
didn't matter what you studied. It didn't matter what you did. You get a degree, you get a job, we're both Midwesterners. You get a job that pays you well enough to have a home,
Yeah.
two cars, maybe even a cabin, on a lake somewhere, right? You're
Mhm.
doing great.
And it's easier
If
work
you
than going
decide
down
to
to the
go.
foundry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easier than, welding and some of the other things that you
Mhm.
might have wanted to do. But if you wanted to do that, you could have an equal outcome.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the case, but I think that there's still this lingering perception that if I go to college, I'm going to get a job. And not only am I going to get a job, but I'm going to get a job that's going to pay me $500,000 the
Mhm.
second I cross the stage at the age of 22.
Yeah.
And that is not correct. right? So
Yeah.
we have a lot of different things happening where there's a misunderstanding of cost versus price. There's a misunderstanding of the burden that graduates have on the whole.
Mhm.
And there's a misunderstanding of what a reasonable outcome is and what higher education is actually for. Higher education, yes, you still have a higher likelihood of earning a job that will give you a higher income and higher long-term earning potential over the course of your career if you go to a 4-year college than if you don't. But there's a lot of nuance in that, right? There's what you study.
Mhm.
There's whether you choose to attend an in-state public university or an out-of-state private college, that's going to come at a
Mhm.
premium
Or
cost,
an
right?
out of
And
state
so,
public that's a lot of
or an
times
out
even
of
more
yes,
expensive.
exactly. So there's so much, just like anything else that captures headlines and clicks, right? There's nuance.
Mhm.
And I think that in a lot of ways we have to reframe how we help high school students understand what their options are. Because there's clearly a breakdown. There's clearly something that's not happening where at the age of 17, 18, you're trying to make this huge life decision. And I
Mhm.
think part of the problem that we're seeing with this student loan crisis is that there's just there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a real urgency to help students become more sophisticated consumers in a lot of ways. Because higher ed, it's not just about the job, it's about, study abroad experiences and the people that you meet and the other things that you're exposed to that you're not necessarily going to get if you take different paths, right? And so it's the ability to look at the experience holistically and not just, am I going to get a job and is it going to pay me enough money to justify the debt that I'm taking out?
Mhm.
It's more than that. But understanding the cost, the true cost, um, both in the short term and the long term, is something that clearly we're just not there.
Yeah. Yep. It's it's a complicated conversation. There's a lot of caveats, and it's just easier for people to say, "Oh, it's massive amounts of debt," rather
Yeah.
than look at the nuance.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they're including master's debt, professional program debt, doctoral
Yeah.
degree debt, and yeah, that's
Or
going to drive
people
the
who
number up.
if you spend 6 years
Yeah.
at a private liberal arts college,
Yeah.
and you study left-handed puppetry,
Yeah.
and and
It's
you
going to be
can't,
hard. It's going to be hard.
you're gonna have a tough time. It's gonna be
Yep.
tough. It's
Yep.
gonna be really tough. We
I
both
mean,
have kids,
yep.
and we've got, I know in our household we're going to have some very early conversations about what
Mhm.
options are and aren't on the table when it comes to looking at college.
Yeah. Yep. I've known people who went to they were even commuters, so they saved him money, but they were commuters at a regional public and spent 6 years getting a general studies degree. It's like a lot of times financial aid's only good for 4. You're paying 2 years full cost to get a general
Yeah.
studies degree. All right. Uh,
Yeah. But
it's
someone somewhere didn't intervene to say this
yeah.
isn't a good idea.
Yep.
You know.
Another trend I'm trying to keep an eye on here as we're in high turnover and high job searching season.
Mm.
What is happening with this leadership pipeline? I don't know. I don't know what's the pipeline looked like in K-12 because there are so many. I am a marketing office of one, or I'm a marketing
Yeah.
office of one half because I'm wearing so many hats. What does a leadership pipeline look like then? There is none. You can't have a
No.
single person be a pipeline. And enrollment, if you have one or two people in your office, there, that alone makes it hard to have a pipeline. How are you
Mm-hmm.
preparing yourself? Um, but we're seeing right now, there's just so much turnover. People people being fired, people saying, okay, this is just too much stress. I'm going to go somewhere else and the grass will be greener. Uh, and when you're starting out admission staff at the bottom I always say it's not much of a ladder because very much a pyramid where you have
Hmm.
one person at the top, a couple directors, and then a lot of counseling staff. Uh, if those people at the bottom are starting out at 30,000, it's hard to make you want to stay in that and think, well, 10 years down the road, I might be able to make it up to director somewhere, you know,
Somewhere.
somewhere. Uh, it's always amazing to me. Like I went to Illinois ACAC. I've been to different leadership middle management programs, things like that. Um, and how often when you talk to people and hear their backstory of how they got into leadership, it was right time, right place, right time. That,
Hmm.
well, this person left, and so I got promoted. Uh, which is always interesting to me. How many people are in leadership roles who never intended to be? Um,
Hmm.
it wasn't an intentional choice. It was, well, everyone else left, so I'm the director now. Um,
Hmm.
and then we see with all this turnover, you have people. I keep seeing announcements of, well, we brought in this new VP. They were the VP of this other college. We got this new director. They were director of this other college. You see almost no movement up. There's a lot
Yeah, it's
of,
all lateral.
yep, a lot of lateral moves. And now with colleges closing, okay, now you have all these directors and VPs who are able to fill these other director and VP roles. Where are people moving up from the bottom? Are we just losing everybody? Um, it's something that we have to think about because it's going to have implications 5, 10, 15 years down the road. If
Yeah.
you have a shortage of people who have long-term experience, who have weathered some of these things before, they might think that we're going to lose that generational knowledge of, hey, we saw something just like this 15 years ago. If your entire staff has been there less than 5 years, they aren't going to have that.
I think it's very similar in K-12, and it's interesting. There's been a lot of conversation lately, even about heads of school and the pipeline for that, because on an increasing basis, people are realizing that it's not all it's cracked up to be, as
Mm-hmm.
in terms of something to aspire to. It's a very difficult job. It's only getting
Mm-hmm.
harder. And where I think the higher ed industry is probably a little bit further ahead than K-12 is in at least having some professional development systems, opportunities available for people to learn how to lead. That doesn't really exist in K-12. You have some really great consultants out there who are kind of carrying that water. And I think that that's really great. You have some, hiring firms out there that offer some tools and resources, but, there's a pretty traditional path to headship. A lot of people start in the classroom and work their way up. But if you don't want to be a head of school, it's a little that it gets increasingly more
Mm-hmm.
difficult. If you aspire to be a division director, let's say, okay, you start in the classroom, you work your way up, but once you get there, you just kind of sit there. And a lot of the time, people in leadership positions, senior leadership positions in K-12 schools, it's a very similar situation where it happens by accident.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're talking at the very, very top, the head, assistant head level. And even then, it tends to happen based on your experience functionally and not your experience as a leader or a manager. And, we've talked offline about how important it is to demonstrate both.
Yeah.
But there's no
They're
one out
different
there
skill
that's really
sets.
saying they're different skill sets. Some people are really, really good at their jobs, but have no business managing people,
Mm-hmm.
and so, but you've got to be willing to have that conversation. And I think that in general, too, in business, in education, in a lot of industries, I think we could all do a better job of creating leadership opportunities for people who are extremely capable, but either don't want to manage people or shouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not always, the two are not always connected. And that's something that I think is also a really big concern, not just having that pipeline, but how are we going to hold hands and align on helping those people, supporting them, creating mentoring opportunities, and really putting them in a position where they can lead successfully, not just in terms of the ability to execute on, the to-do list and the job description, but so that they can lead and mentor people and help other people grow, because that's a really big part of that as well. And I just don't think that we've figured that out yet.
Yeah. Well, we, as always, are right up against time. Uh, so, yeah, I would love to hear people's feedback. If you have other thoughts, if there's something that we missed, if we're looking at things, you think, well, I think you could look at it with this framing. Love to hear about that. I love having
Absolutely.
those conversations. So thank you, Angela. Thank you for
Thank
everyone
you.
listening. Yeah. Have a great day. Stay safe.